to it, given where we are in our life cycle with AI. Apparently, everything's AI these days. So I'd like to start by introducing our panel today. Why don't we start with Elgin? Why don't you give 2 minutes on you, and then we'll go to Thomas, and then we'll dive in.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. Elgin Jones. I'm a Senior Vice President and Executive Director here at P&G Cyber. I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. office. I have roughly 25 years experience in software engineering, IT, and data breach response work. I have 7+ years in Big Four consulting, and I also have 3+ years in federal contracting as well. So I've been involved in roughly over 3,000 ransomware cases in the front lines and in the trenches, as well as overseeing a team to perform those ransomware matters as well. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. My name is Thomas Langer. I'm a principal here with AgileBlue. I have about 21 years experience in the industry in the cybersecurity field. I worked at the Big Four, Deloitte and KPMG for 7 years. I also worked in the government side, did government consulting, threat hunting, SOC consulting, did a lot of incident response in the trenches with other firms, working with pretty much primarily with large, medium, small companies. So that's really my background in the past.
Perfect. Thank you, fellas. And for those of you on this call who don't know me, I'm Tony Petricola, co-founder and president of AgileBlue. I don't have anywhere close to the really cool experience that Thomas and Elgin have, but that's why I'm going to be the moderator today. No one wants to hear me anyway. That's where you bring in the team. Real quick, just one slide on AgileBlue for those of you who don't know us, who are maybe new to this webinar series we put together. We're headquartered in the United States. We're actually in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm standing right now. We are the developers of the Cerulean AI-powered XDR SOAR platform. That's our technology backed by our US-based 24/7 security operations center as a service. So that's what we provide to our customers globally. But again, headquartered, and that SOC that I mentioned is in the United States. What's interesting that I'd like to also call out is we have a partnership with Security Scorecard. So again, third-party company, not selling anything here. I hope you understand that. Security Scorecard is a great company. And a lot of folks on this call might understand who they are. Maybe you're just being introduced to them for the first time. You can check them out at securityscorecard.com. But they do constant external security posture scans to our customers' domains. It's part of our platform. The reason this is important is they just did their annual thing as well. And I wanted to pull this slide up. Where their research is showing, based on what they're seeing, right? They're able to provide constant visibility of what's happening external, right? That external posture that maybe you don't have a good understanding of for your organization. And based on their grading system, where you're more likely to not only be breached, but needing Elgin and Thomas's help because ransomware plays a huge part in this, right? So the thing that Security Scorecard provides is visibility, is understanding. Where do I have some gaps, and what gaps do I need to prioritize to get filled? And they just had like I said, they just had their annual review, and it was a very interesting listen to see how the correlation between folks who understand their visibility, by the way, not just because they're using Security Scorecard, whatever you use, but if you understand the visibility and the vulnerabilities of your organization, tremendously can cut down on your chances of a potential breach. Nothing's ever 100%, we all know that, but cutting down on the chances, mitigating that risk. So if you have any questions on this, let us know. But I wanted to point this out because as I listened to theirs late last week, it made a lot of sense to me to add. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. A little recap of 2023, really diving into 2024, talking about more AI strategies as well, because that's a real thing these days. And then, of course, we'll answer anybody's questions. And like I promised, we will get you back to lunch. So if anybody on this call is a Curb Your Enthusiasm fan like I am, right? Our 2023 predictions were pretty good. Got to say so ourselves. Unfortunately, though, right? Because the things that we said that we thought we'd see happen really grew in 2023. You know, we started things off with talking about API vulnerabilities, hacks, and how that could be one of the fastest growing attack surface. Well, we saw a 30% increase year over year. And by the way, it's January, so some of the numbers won't get fleshed out probably until the end of this quarter. But early, Gartner has an early scorecard of about 30% increase. They believe rising to 70% in 2023 from about 54%. So you're talking a big exposure. And if I had to guess, everybody on this call, it's a blanket statement, but we all use APIs somewhere and we all just assume they're safe, right? Without maybe doing anything on that. And Thomas and Elgin, I'm going to get through this really quick and I'm going to ask you guys to summarize your thoughts on 2023 in a second as well. This isn't going to be a diatribe by Tony because everybody would hang up then. Next, we went into supply chain attacks, right? Especially as there's wars, unfortunately, in this world that have grown. You know, last year started with the Ukraine, unfortunately, went into Israel. And anytime you see those types of things, supply chain attacks tend to grow. And obviously, we weren't predicting anything here except supply chain is so risky these days. It has so many vulnerabilities. And when one supply chain goes down, it's kind of a domino theory, right? Some research that was by Scientia and Security Scorecard say about 98% of organizations that have detailed third-party supply chains saw something, whether it was a disruption, whether it was a potential try, whether it was an actual breach. And 40% of third-party vendor breaches occurred through the unauthorized network access. And again, that is something that is kind of an unforced error, right? Unauthorized network access, totally understand. But who's monitoring? Who's accessing things? Who's monitoring whether somebody has those credentials or not? And by the way, are they using them the right way, maliciously, or maybe just negligent, right? We also talked about deep fakes, right? As AI was just starting to get going right at the end of 2022, going into 2023. We already had some use cases where we saw some voice and video deep fakes. Well, obviously, we've all seen the news. 3,000% increase year over year. I have to assume 2024 is going to be just as ugly because some of the things you've already seen have started just awful, right? And you know, if there's football fans on this, you know, it started with some of that NFL stuff. It started with Taylor Swift in a very awkward and unfortunate way. And I think you're just going to continue to see this, not just happening to celebrities and things like that, but unfortunately, people just like us, right? Where you can get a phone call and sound just like your CFO and telling you to wire $3,000 or $10,000 or $50,000 somewhere, right? They're growing. Insider threats, we definitely talked about because of layoffs, because of disgruntled employees, right? Surveys were showing that more and more employees were being disgruntled with their jobs or having issues with their jobs or not aligning philosophically with their jobs. Then you add in layoffs, right? Then you add in an economy that I thought was pretty good, but maybe manic to some folks. And all of a sudden you can think insider threats might go up. And unfortunately they did. They increased 47% over the last 2 years, which brings a lot of loss for organizations, right? And then of course the SMS or even Slack phishing, right? Which we've seen a lot of. SMS, I don't know about you, calls, texts, just ridiculous. I got one the other day that had a picture of a glass of wine and said, can't wait to share this bottle with you. And I'm thinking, wow, who did I commit to having wine with tonight? This could get a little awkward. But they're getting more creative, not just text or links, but pictures. And like I said, probably soon video or audio in a deep fake way, right? But huge increases there. So, you know, a lot of the things we thought we were going to see happened, unfortunately. And I'm sure all these should be on the 2024 list as well, because I'm sure they're all going to grow. But unfortunately, there's some new things to keep in mind for 2024, which we'll get to. Let's start with Elgin. Any thoughts on 2023, how you'd recap it? And man, you are in the trenches. You see ransomware every single day. It'd be interesting to hear your recap on that, Elgin.
Tony, I think you're spot on there. Yeah, you know, we're seeing a rise in deep fakes as well. Obviously, supply chain, and then the biggest one was SolarWinds 2 years ago. Yeah, so supply chain will be a major issue going forward as well. Deep fakes, you know, it's election year as well. Yeah, so it's going to be an interesting election. Yeah, if you can take Biden's voice or Trump's voice and manipulate that as well as, a picture of the face, then it's going to be interesting. What's going to be true or false these days. And there's going to be a surge in attacks. Yeah, we see every election year there's going to be a surge in the attacks, and now we're going to leverage deep fakes as well as generating phishing campaigns, advanced phishing campaigns as well. Yeah, looking at 2023, phishing was still the #1 way that attackers got into organizations. So I predict in 2024 it will continue on the same path. Yeah, we were seeing about 5 to 10 business email compromise cases every week in 2023. Yeah, that's going to tick up. Yeah, and I think with AI at the forefront now, and the power of AI to craft great emails, we're going to have to be vigilant. Yeah, everybody's going to have to be careful in looking at these emails as well, because once you're in the tenant and it comes from Joe X and the email looks well crafted, social engineering is going to be, something to take away from 2024 as well. But I'll leave it there.
One of the biggest things I saw, I want to say from a personal level too, and this I think should be for everybody to pay attention to, DocuSign. DocuSign had a huge year of growth of spam where you'd get something and it'd say, click here to sign your whatever. And we use DocuSign for everything we do at our company. And I'm sure a lot of folks on this call do. And naturally, you're going to click on it to see what it is, right? Well, you can't even do that anymore. You got to really look. Where's the URL going? Oh my God, this is a fake. It's just everything is getting harder because the technology is making things easier for the criminals. But that's a great point, Elgin. Thomas, anything you'd add on 2023 as we recap this year?
Yeah, just to add, obviously, know your network. We've seen a lot of uptick in SMS and these phishing attacks. Email attacks have been prevalent, and they really have gotten a huge uptick in 2023. So we'll see that continue in 2024, and that can come in multiple versions of attacks. We've seen where they try to hack administrative accounts, create new administrative accounts, and then go from there. It's usually all for financial gains in that regard. Obviously, AI and API attacks will definitely increase this year. We see it already based on last year. So one is that I always say: know your network, know your vulnerabilities, make sure you're using something similar to Scorecard, or make sure we do your pen testing vulnerability. Because if you don't know your network and you don't know all the what's being monitored, you put yourself at risk, particularly with the autonomous attacks that will definitely increase in 2024.
Yep. Well, banks have know your customer, KYC. You need to go ahead and copyright the KYN, know your network. I like it. It's good stuff. All right. So the last thing we'll say is 43% of attacks were aimed at small and mid-sized businesses, right? So, I think everybody hears, okay, Microsoft got hacked, last week before, whatever that was, and filed their 8K, and it looked pretty scary. And they say they kind of don't know the extent of everything just yet. And something tells me they do, and they're just not gonna fully release that. But 43%, that's a huge number, are still being aimed at the small and mid-sized guys, because only 14% have the resources to protect themselves. So I'm president of InfraGard in Ohio, and one of the things that FBI came out with and said was, going after the big guys anymore, whether they're going to pay ransomware or do this or do that is just one thing, and it does lead to a headline. But the money's to be made on the small and mid-sized businesses, the FBI is saying, because they have to make a decision on paying. They will be brought down, and if they're down from a supply perspective, so are their partners. And instead of just losing those partners, losing business, going out of business, sometimes they make decisions very quick to pay because that is their business, right? So your small, mid-sized business, which I'm sure the majority of folks on this call are, be careful, because this is what the numbers show, and these are real numbers from 2023.
Yeah, and just to add there, Tony, as well on that slide, attackers, love going after the low-hanging fruit. Yeah, so the low-hanging fruit is where they get more of their financial gain from. By the way, they would rather play in the low-hanging fruit than with the large organizations that presumed to have good security in place. Yeah, so low-hanging fruit is always a target.
Yep. I'll also say this from that meeting too, when you think about it, when there's a kinetic war happening, kinetic wars, unfortunately, there's a bunch right now, and seems no political statements, but it seems like it could be getting worse. Anytime there's a kinetic war, those nation states need cash to operate those wars. Well, you looked at and Elgin and Thomas probably saw this with ransomware. You know, there was a little bit of a lull between Russia, Ukraine, but then once it got kicking up, so did everything else. Well, you're starting to see the same thing in Israel as we get into month, whatever, 4 or 5 of that. And then some other things happening. Unfortunately, that's where these groups make their money. And there is some tremendous talent in Russia, Ukraine, obviously North Korea, and then in the Middle East, right? Great talent in terms of criminals and hackers. And this is what we're all battling about. So just because you're a small business doesn't mean like, why would they think about us? Why? Because if they can get 1 million small businesses at X dollars, that's a lot of money, right? The law of big numbers. So 2024, we'll talk about some AI stuff, of course, talk about the cyber skills gap, mobile, which is obviously, going to be something forever, right? Fraud, phishing, ransomware, identity-based attacks. And then we'll talk about the SEC regulation thing that just came out and how that's turning into a very interesting thing. So first, like Elgin just said, cyber attacks are going to continue to rise. And with AI, it's only going to make it easier for the bad guys and not necessarily easier for us, the folks playing defense, and more importantly, the folks trying to mitigate that risk, right? So we've seen that rise in cyber attacks, and it hit an all-time high, and now it looks like it's going to re-accelerate into 2024. And when you think about it, one thing to bring up from an AI perspective, everybody's talking about all these LLMs, large language models. Are they Amazons? Are they Anthropic? Is it ChatGPT? All this great stuff, right? And then they think people are going to use AI. But here's what folks aren't keeping in mind. What happens if the LLM that literally millions of people are using to build applications and AI on top of it, what happens if that's not secure? What happens if that can be tricked? What happens if that can be compromised, right? To not only, people think of AI strictly in terms of generative, which is going to push back content and data. What about AI that actually automates actions and automates human workflows, and it's using bad data? This is something that is we haven't even scratched the surface with this. That surface is still looking good. It's put together still because this is so new. But when you see what some of these researchers are taking these LLMs, right? And they're trying to figure out a way to trick them. Unfortunately, it's going pretty well, meaning the tricking is going pretty well, right? It's unclear whether this behavior can be fully patched by the providers, because at the end of the day, it's these LLMs are obviously building this out. And when somebody just tries to play around with it and tries to destroy humanity, I'm going to put that in quotes, right? Not as like, okay, take down our CRM system or take down our website, or something like that, or tell our firewalls to all go offline. It's more intense, like destroy humanity. That's pretty scary. Now, will they destroy humanity? Let's hope not. But that, when you look at an LLM potentially being accessed, that should give us all pause for how we're accessing these large language models and tying business to it. Elgin, Thomas, anything you guys are thinking through or potentially starting to see with LLMs and AI, and where these compromises can come in?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Elgin.
Yeah, obviously, LLMs is like every software development. Yeah, there has to be a software development life cycle as well in terms of LLMs. Yeah, we know that ChatGPT was already had an incident last year. I think it was late last year, that attackers were able to get in and view other users' search terms and stuff like that. So, misuse of LLMs, is going to be a big thing. Yeah, we talked about supply chain attacks. Now, large language models, if attackers can get in there as well, there's going to be huge vulnerabilities. Yeah, and set that aside. There's always ways to put bias information as well into these LLMs. Yeah, so whether it's truth or false. So it opens up a can of worms, to be honest, Tony. And it's interesting that that you bring this slide to the forefront here.
Mhm.
And just to add, Tony, there as well, I think it increases, 0-day vulnerabilities, right? There's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of applications, AI, ChatGPT, and everything else that's sitting behind it. Not just the artificial intelligence, but it's actually what's running behind it. What type of security is back there that you don't really know? So I think if anybody's using ChatGPT or anything like that, you got to be careful what type of data is being fed to, what ports are open, what else is open. So you're not unknowingly leaving everything open, and a lot of data is going out. And if something comes into the back door, a lot of that data potential of coming out. Like I said, 0-day vulnerability happens a lot in 2023. I mean, it's just end of January 2024. I'm sure that will just increase just because of a lot of these artificial intelligence and these applications that are out there.
Yeah,
right.
and just to add, there needs to be more guardrails and regulations around these LLMs as well. Yeah, as I said, at the end of the day, it's a piece of software, and that can be exploited as well.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that just came in was in 2024, somebody's asking if I attempt to deploy any AI strategies, any thoughts to, properly deploying. One thing I'd say, and then the fellas can jump in, is understand who your provider is and what that AI is doing. I'll give you an example. With AgileBlue, we launched Sapphire. And Sapphire, we're starting very slow with our customers, which is meant to help answer questions, installations, integrations, things like that, where clients, will tend to want to call our support team. By the way, 24/7 support. Anybody needs it, you call, you email, you whatever you need. But folks have been asking for it, so that's what we deployed. We're going to deploy automated response from Sapphire. We're going to wait. We're going to wait and see how these things are used and they come on board. And if you don't do it in phases, this is where I'm getting to the advice. If you don't do it in phases, there's no way to probably be successful to just all of a sudden jump in. OpenAI didn't just release ChatGPT last October and that's it. They've been working on this for many, many years with billions of dollars. So my point is phased approach. Think about what you're trying to solve and jump in on a phased approach. Elgin, Thomas, anything you'd add with that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Tony. Obviously, there's a lot of privacy and security concerns around these AI, LLMs. Yeah, so start with a policy in place. Yeah, I think every company, there's no regulation out there right now where every company should start creating policies around this and enforce those policies. That's a good starting point. Yeah, because there's a lot of issues right now with
Yep.
privacy and security concerns. And if, every employee in the organization is using ChatGPT, what sensitive information related to the organization are they putting into the LLMs? Yeah, because it's machine learning. They're going to take that sensitive information and store it. That's what's good about LLMs. They're great at processing large data sets.
That's right. And Samsung was one of the first group of people who actually did that, put some sensitive information into ChatGPT, and it didn't turn out really well for them because they didn't that information became public before they did their public earnings release because they're a publicly traded company.
Right.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about email phishing, right? So ChatGPT is shown to have a huge increase in not just phishing emails, but the effectiveness of phishing emails, and how it's fooling people and how it's making things even harder to determine. And we're seeing a huge growth in that, right? So, where folks think, hey, phishing, I think we're getting on top of it. We train our people, we do this, we think we're getting on top of it. Do not get complacent when it comes to just regular old email phishing attacks. They're growing. They're actually been more successful, and AI is helping drive this, including ChatGPT, which if you ask it to, create a phishing email for it, it's going to tell you, I can't do that. But then if you say, hey, just create an email here that gets people to click to do this, it's like, oh, I'll be happy to help you with that. So it's easy to get around these. Elgin, Thomas, with some of the work you guys have seen with ransomware, are you guys also seeing an increase in phishing emails as maybe the start or the catalyst to it?
Yeah, I'll take a stab with that. And the figure there is staggering. Yeah, 1,265%. I think business email compromise phishing will always be around. It's going to increase, yeah, year upon year. We see it daily on the front lines, as I mentioned earlier, and the crafting of the emails now. A couple of years ago, you could see that some words were missing or the English language wasn't that good. But now you can craft, ChatGPT or other AI platforms can create very spot on emails. Yeah, I know there's a lot of AI tools in the dark web as well that attackers are using, such as Worm, GPT, fraud GPT as well. There's a lot of things that the attackers are leveraging down there to create phishing attacks. Yeah, create the malware. Yeah, so we're seeing a very big uptick, and 2024 is going to be increasing for sure. But I'll leave it at that, and maybe Thomas can jump in with some ransomware figures.
Yeah, just to add, we saw definitely in 2023 a huge uptick in phishing, and I think that will just continue. The sophistication of these phishing attacks have also increased, or man-in-the-middle attack, where if you're talking to a vendor or to a client or to a supplier or anybody, somebody, it's not just you, but also them, and they can really be what we call a man-in-the-middle attack, come in, make it look like it's Joe on the other side that you'd be conversing with, but instead you're talking to the actor. And then for a lot of us is financial gain. So there's a couple things, your technology, your filtering, multi-factor authentication, a lot of those, but also employee training, and also for highly effective groups such as HR, finances, or any other, that because most of this is financial gain, particularly if we're talking about invoicing, other things. Hey, I changed my invoicing. What other security measures have you implemented to make sure that HR finance doesn't send out anything fraudulent to somebody that think it's an actual vendor, but it's actually a threat actor.
Yep. And it's a good point. And the biggest thing we've seen is the tonality of the email. So before, all phishing emails kind of sounded the same, like, right, a little robotic in ways. But now you can tell ChatGPT to sound like an 18-year-old college kid or a 35-year-old banking executive or whatever. And you're seeing the tone of that email changing, right? Which makes it even more real. Hey, a question came in, fellas, and I think this is a good point to ask this question to you. Are there specific regions where these actors have been more aggressive that you guys have seen, especially in your DFIR practice? Have you seen different regions growing, or is it kind of the same old people that we know?
It's the same old, yeah, especially phishing attacks. Africa has been known to create a lot of, these phishing campaigns as well.
Well,
Eastern
the
Europe,
prince with $1 million, right? Because I got $1
yeah,
million coming to me soon.
yep.
So,
And
yeah.
the grandmother scam, yeah, where they're now using the deep fakes of the voice of the grandchild to
Yep.
be able to, pretend to be the grandchild. Yeah. But certainly, to answer your question, it's, regions stay the same: Russia, Eastern Europe, Africa, China, North Korea, you name it. The power of the dark web to share this technology as well and share everything, that's all they do is buy it out, yeah, and make it as a service.
It is a service, that's for sure. A couple of other things as well, going back to the LLM discussion we were having, the data leaks, the data poisoning that we were kind of getting to. What's interesting is Security Week last week ran an interesting article, if anybody saw it. And they said critical vulnerabilities found in open source AI ML platforms. Okay, so that's going to grab some attention. And then you go down and look at what they're looking at: ML Flow, Clear ML, Hugging Face. You're talking about folks who have huge parts in terms of open source platforms, huge market share, right? So when they list these three as the byline, that should have been like the headline, like, hey, 70% of all LLMs being used right now could have severe vulnerabilities. That's probably a more appropriate tagline. So again, coming back to some of these tools we're using, be careful, because it looks like there's ways where injections and data poisoning and things like that have definitely grown. It just comes down to your team understanding what they're doing, what they're deploying, the data they're looking for, and those decisions need to be made and probably need to be reviewed constantly. You can't just assume it's fine and move forward, right? That's not the thing to do. So let's talk a little bit about this. Elgin brought this up a little bit ago on the type of sensitive data that goes into ChatGPT. This is some old statistics from mid last year, but it's perfect, right? Sensitive data about the organization, source code, client data, regulated data into ChatGPT. Now, people are trying to figure out, hey, how can I improve my business? Great. That's what these tools are for. But to dump all this sensitive information in, you have to understand this stuff can get out. and folks are just dumping it in there. And we have actually an example that we can share. We're not going to share any names, but a hospital system took data that they had regarding cancer patients, regarding the cancer patient diagnosis, type of cancers. And their whole point was, hey, how can we shorten stays? So, their mind is in the right spot. How do we shorten the stay and make it easier on a cancer patient who's going through a ton? So they put all this data in to try to understand how, maybe there could be something that they're not thinking through. Well, it turned out to be pretty bad because that data got out. And that's obviously not just a HIPAA violation. I mean, that could be just absolute misery for folks, right? So, at the end of the day, it's really important to understand everything that you're putting into these chat GPTs. Another question came in regarding this deck. By the way, I should have said this earlier. We will absolutely send this deck out to everyone when we're done.
Yeah, and just to add to that previous slide,
Yeah,
Tony, I play around with ChatGPT a lot. If you tell ChatGPT pretend to be a Linux terminal, and tell it that you've written some source code, and then paste that source code in, it will rewrite it for you. So it will capture that source code, take it away, and it's in this data set then. So it can turn it around and make it better for you, but that source code then belongs to ChatGPT.
Yep, absolutely. And by the way, another question came in. It was kind of a point, which is a very, very good point, and then a question. How do you strike a balance between the pros and cons of AI tools when it comes to automating a security process, such as patch management, intrusion prevention? It's a great question, Mahmoud. And I'd answer it like this. What we've seen and what we're trying to do, and I'm being selfish in this answer, of course, is automate workflows that could potentially lengthen the investigation, the vulnerability cleanup, the patching of a human process, right? Cybersecurity will always need smart human beings, running things, setting things up. But there's those processes that could be run that once we know with a high degree of confidence, we can have automation, we can have AI run those. So your example of vulnerability patching, that's an easier one, right? Escalations or isolating devices and things like that, when you have an issue, those are easier ones to do. It's the harder ones that I'd say tread very lightly in those right now until more of this fleshes out over Q2, maybe even into Q3 of this year. But as you know, cyber vendors are moving fast, AI is moving fast. I think you'll see more resolution as we get there.
And just to add, Tony, as well. So we've seen countless, people use a lot of different applications in the cloud and AI. Like I said, know these applications, ask the tough questions, right? Where's your data being stored? The data that you or whatever's being stored in the cloud, make sure that their security is up to par. So you need to know, have they logging enabled? What type of ports are enabled? Where is it sitting? Because I've seen multiple times on incidents where the attacker came in through to a backdoor or anything, and the data wasn't protected as it should be. So I think it's important that if you're using these, and you should use these applications, but if you do, ask the tough questions, making sure that their security is up to par where it should be.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's move on. A lot on AI, cyber skills gap. Again, AI infuses this, right? So this was a study by RSM, so very large organization, really focusing on the hiring challenges for the small and middle market companies when it comes to hiring cyber talent, whether that's strategic cyber talent, whether that's folks who actually execute. It's been very difficult, right? 60%, even in the 70% where they're having troubles. And by the way, it's not just the initial hire, it's then the retention of those folks because the big guys keep coming. They need folks. And they're able to put together packages that maybe small and mid-sized businesses can't even get close to. So the cyber skills gap is also creating, and this is something that's always been, we didn't have this on our thing last year. The cyber skills gap can probably be on everything. But if you think about it, as everything is rising, that burnout is a real thing. The amount of work that is being thrown on folks without automation is going through the roof, more than it's ever been. And when you see organizations looking to outsource, they're trying to find organizations to work with to obviously overcome those talent gaps. Automation, where can automation come in? But those are big parts of where the middle market, small and mid-sized business is just having a tremendous lack of resource. So this is something to keep an eye on. And again, you might be thinking, well, what can I do? There's only so much money you can offer. Absolutely. But this is where technology and potentially third-party potential managed services can help an organization understand those things where it could potentially plug a gap, not necessarily thinking if I don't hire, it just goes exposed. Leaving it exposed because of not enough people, that's a big deal. But of course, when it comes to DFIR and different things like that, you need folks. So hopefully you're working with an organization. For the sake of time, we're going to touch on a couple of these real quick. Elgin and Thomas can add anything they feel they should add. But when you look at those human workflows we talked about, what can be automated because of that cyber skills gap, a lot of that root cause analysis, right? Deeper investigations, understanding a huge swath of data, which all lead to hopefully a reduction in mean time to detect and respond, is a huge portion of where some of these automation technologies are critical, right? Not just critical from a timing perspective, but from that cyber skills gap perspective, if your team just can't get to all this stuff, right? Or maybe not have the expertise to even do so. A lot of folks look at cyber and it's, hey, we have an IT team. I'm sure you got a great IT team. Mm-hmm. Does that IT team have cyber specific experience as well? And sometimes that's where the second part of the question is a big gotcha for a lot of small and mid-sized businesses. Thomas, Elgin, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Elgin.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely to that. Look, not everybody can do everything depending on the size, large, small, or medium-sized company. So, have a view of your network data, email logs, particularly, it's critical if there is something that's going on, you should be able to identify exactly what that is quickly so you can identify this is legitimate, not legitimate, and then we can actually respond to that. I think visibility within your logs, email, network, VPN, firewall, and anything the like of those things is important, and understanding what that means. And a lot of that could be automated, but if something happens, we need to know the command structure and how to respond to those quickly.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Totally agree. Let's move into mobile, right? We all got these things. Everyone has these things, right? So that's the vector that's growing, obviously, by leaps and bounds, although we still use our laptops every day. I'm old. I love a laptop, right? If I have to do something, I prefer to do it on this. But in 2024, the rise, or projected rise of 3D phishing, like I talked about a little bit earlier, in social engineering. I'll tell you, the social engineering is getting pretty intense, right? And, a lot of folks are now talking about Twitter as if you're looking at Twitter, whether it's for business or personal. Let's just say for business. I use it for business. I have nothing important to say personal, so who wants to even follow me for that? But it's a business thing. Mm-hmm. The more responses and interactions I'm seeing in posts, as you start thinking about them, like, they're being generated by AI. A human being is not sitting there, typing this thing out, thinking through something. And if you're starting to see it in that avenue, it's starting to most likely proliferate everywhere. And one of the things as well, I was at an event, a federal event about a month or so ago, and they were talking about the malicious use of QR codes, right? Everything today has a QR code. It started with menus, as that grew during COVID, and now everything's a QR code, right? I was down to visit my daughter in college the other day and needed a QR code to prove who I was, which is kind of crazy. But the point is, they're everywhere. And now we're seeing malicious use of that. If you click it, what can it do? What can it take you to? What can it start? What can that be the genesis of a potential type of breach? Thomas, Elgin, are you guys seeing things with some of your deep research into more mobile as the vector? We talked about voice and video, but what about text, QR codes? Are you starting to see any of this stuff pop up?
100%. There's a big uptick in it, actually, with a lot of our clients. Yeah. Can you take a look at this mobile phone? We're getting, a lot of SMS texts coming in as well. So a big uptick. QR codes you mentioned. I remember the Super Bowl last year, the QR code was on the screen. Yeah. What happens if you compromise that and it does a redirection to a malicious website? You're not going to know, having a beer and eating some chips, yeah, where you're going in that path. So QR codes, 2024 is going to be an uptick in that as well. And, the term quishing, very interesting term they've come up with, yeah.
Yeah. That was a term for everything. And you know, in the Super Bowl, if they were able to compromise that thing that was on my screen, which by the way did not work for me, maybe it was my TV, maybe it was me. You know, there's only like 120 million people globally watching that. So, you know, there's not like if somebody can get to a QR code, and I can't even wrap my mind around this. You click it. Look, let's use a restaurant. You go into a restaurant, you hit it.
Mhm.
How do you know? Like, how do you know where that thing's going, right? You
Yeah.
click it. It's not like a URL that you're going to spend time with. A lot of folks, when they're on their phones, it's
Yeah.
a matter of quick, hit it, go. You're not thinking about anything.
No.
This is going to become a very big vector that is going to be able to take down, forget folks like us. What about our kids, right? That click on anything they see. And now you got kids' phones that are tied to your accounts at Apple or maybe even Apple Pay, potentially credit cards, right? All these things that really are huge vectors. I tell you, this is the one that scares me the most. And you know, there's only so much you can do about it. I think it's going to make it very easy for the bad guys, unfortunately.
Yeah. And you mentioned humanity earlier, Tony. It's going to cause huge issues for humanity. You know, it's going to be interesting times ahead.
It is. There's no doubt about it. A couple of points. Security errors that we just talked about. So clicking a phishing link, right? Downloading malware. You look at some of these numbers. You know, 18%, 13%, 9%, 8%. You're like, okay, those are smaller numbers, right? But at the scale of literally billions of emails being sent out and, you know, hundreds of millions of potential, you know, downloads, or even probably in the billions as well. 8% of a monster number, again, is a monster number, right? So again, the whole point is to continue to drive it down and reduce these percentages. The problem is the denominator keeps going up as well. So it just, you know, it takes a lot to potentially protect yourself from this. You can't protect everything. That's why you monitor, you secure, you layer your security, you work with a good organization. And are you stopping everything? I don't know about that. I would never say that. But the more you can do to just mitigate risk, put your organization in the position to not just mitigate that risk, but hopefully sidestep what could be a huge disruption or potential payment.
Mhm.
You know, we talked about malware attack vectors from web into email. We've seen that growth. Elgin, Thomas, any other, have you seen this as well when you guys do your forensics? Where are you seeing the majority of things kind of starting? Is it like this chart says at email, or are you seeing it kind of all over the place?
No, 100% agree with this chart. Yeah, everybody has email on the phone now. Yeah, whether it's Gmail, whether it's Outlook, it's still the number one vector, you know, of attack. And it's even obviously it's cloud, yeah, Office 365 or something like that on your phone. And if you click a link on your phone, it's going to give access then, obviously to attackers within the tenant. Yeah, so yeah, I 100% agree. Email is still the number one way that attackers are coming into organizations, and once they're in, you know, as Thomas mentioned earlier, it's usually financial gain. But if they don't stop there, then they may hop from the tenant and deploy ransomware. Yeah. So ransomware is like the last hurrah that, hey, we're going to encrypt your data. But even with resiliency and backups, yeah, these days it's all about reputation harm. Hey, we're going to post your customer data out there. We're going to
Yep.
ruin your reputation. So email still the number one way I'm seeing attackers coming in. Thomas?
And just to add, you're absolutely right. Based on volume, it's definitely email bar none. But sophisticated attacks, I would say, you know, 0-day vulnerability. Going back to that vulnerability, I think, you know, if somebody can come in to install a web shell, you know, some of those web shell, if you've seen what they can do, it would scare, you know, your socks off, because they can pretty much do everything. They can, you know, query your databases, they can exfiltrate data, they can do all kinds of stuff. So it's absolutely critical that, yes, you know, email, and also your vulnerability, that you patch that you up to speed with those things, so that none of the nasty attacks can happen within your network.
Absolutely. Great points, fellas. So again, wrapping this section up with ransomware as a service, phishing as a service. They've hit the markets like you heard Elgin talk about.
Mhm.
Folks can buy these on the internet and then start putting these to use, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about deep fakes getting more aggressive. there's an actual number right there by CB Insights, which is excellent on these types of things. 31 time, not percent, time increase in deep fake attempts from 2022 into 2023, right? And this is what you know about, right? So this is where you're going to see, I think, the biggest issue moving into this year. And we've started to see things in the voice area, right? The voice area. And one of the biggest telltale signs is you get a call from someone and you do answer it and you say, hello, now this is Tony, something like that. Some of those are designed, not all of them, I don't want to freak everybody out. Some of those are designed to capture those 5-6 words, whatever it is, and then use that as voice spoofing to someone else. And that voice spoof can come over. We've seen case studies in mobile in terms of a text. We've seen them in Slack, and different things like that. So criminals are not just using email for some of these more advanced things. They're using the web, they're using the mobile device, they're even using things like Slack, right?
Yep.
That is pretty damn scary, because if it's in Slack, it's got to be truthful, right? It's my team, right? Well, that just makes you think a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'll add, be careful what you post online, yeah, because these new scams take it a step further, yeah. If it's an audio clip of myself or my son or something like that, they can capture that audio and that voice, yeah, is cloning. You're cloning the voice, and they're using it as a deep fake then against you.
Now, I will say, Elgin, you got a great accent. I have a Cleveland, Ohio accent. It's awful. You have a great accent. So I don't know, yours is way more charming than mine. So I think they're going to have a harder time with yours.
Thanks, Tony.
You're welcome, buddy. All right, identity-based attacks. 75% of those security failures start because privileged access isn't managed, or maybe more importantly, monitored. You know, we talk to clients all the time and are like, hey, you know, who has these access? Where's the privileges? Where's the, you know, the admins, blah, blah, blah. What are those privileges? And they say, hey, we look at this all the time. That list is good to go. Great. Do you monitor it? Are the folks who are supposed to be doing those things doing those things? And by the way, when they're in there, are they doing questionable things? And you'll have generally 10 out of 10, but let's say 9 out of 10, because we know there's nothing certain in this world. The average customer will say, I don't know. I don't know. I think they're doing the right thing. They're the right person. Monitoring of those privileged access credentials is so critical these days. When it comes to doing a deep dive after something has happened, it's probably the correct person, but they might not be monitored to understand the behavior, or more importantly, the anomalous behavior that that person was doing. And those triggers were there. We saw the work, but something happened bad. You do the investigation and you figured out, man, if we were just monitoring this, we might have been able to get out in front of this. A lot of different techniques. Thomas mentioned man in the middle earlier. You see some other ones. Kerber roasting has been growing like crazy. We've seen it. We've detected it. We've stopped it, but we can tell you it's growing like crazy. Fellas, anything else you'd say to any of these techniques?
Yeah, credential stuffing. You know, we do a lot of dark web monitoring. We always see leaked credentials out there, leaked email, leaked passwords. You know, attackers are going to buy all this on the dark web, and they're going to use that information then to perform credential stuffing, yeah, and try and get into other systems belonging to their organization or the user, yeah. So they're going to try and brute force using those leaked credentials to get in, or lateral movement within the environment as well. So a big issue, everything you list there as well. You know, we see it all over the map as well, Tony.
Absolutely. All right, let's just talk about some basics. We're getting close to the end of time. We'll answer a few questions. Like I said, we'll get you guys done right before lunch starts here. Well, lunch Eastern time. If you're not in the Eastern time, sorry, you got another hour to go. But we talked about monitoring. We talked about inventory control. You heard Thomas talk about vulnerability management. Are you doing reviews, right? Configuration reviews of your cloud, of your on-prem. There's so many configurations these days with both software, hardware, cloud. Are you doing reviews of them to make sure they're in the right spots? They're the right configuration. They're the least amount of potential access. We talked about monitoring of administrative privileges, training, making sure you're using tools like SIM, SOC, SOAR, having that incident response plan and doing tabletops to make sure that that plan makes sense and it will work and you're not missing anything. And then, of course, things like MFA. Look, you know, anytime you have to do MFA, you do MFA for anything. I understand it's a little bit of a pain, but to hear someone say we don't do MFA because it's an extra step, like my goodness gracious, that could be the only thing that saves you, right? I'm not saying it's foolproof or perfect.
Yeah.
You know, you see some of the challenges MFA's had, you see some of the challenges Oktas have, things like that. But at the end of the day, layered security helps. Gentlemen, talk to me about some of the couple things you think folks need to at least be doing, and if they're not, they're probably putting themselves in a huge risk.
I think there's a good list up there, Tony, that you already mentioned, and I can't stress enough, in training, yeah, employee training, security awareness, and training. We're human beings. Human beings, at the end of the day, we make mistakes, yeah. So we need to
We
mitigate
do.
those mistakes and teach, teach the responder, yeah, in terms. So, yeah, use strong passwords. Rotate those passwords as well. MFA, that second level of security, the second code that is sent to phones, laptops, or you name it. Obviously, attackers are getting more advanced now, and we've heard stories of MFA being breached as well. But it's still so much better than the password and email and password to get into an application. Yeah, so make sure you have multi-factor authentication enabled. A monitor, you mentioned monitoring, Tony. You're looking for the anomalies, and what I tell clients as well, do an audit, remove disabled old accounts, contractor accounts. That's one big one I will mention, because a lot of the ransomware cases we've done, contractor accounts that have been dormant in the domain, with escalated privilege, have been taken over by attackers, and they've gained lateral movement in the environment. So another one is default accounts. Yeah, make sure these default accounts are removed if they're not in use. But a great list. Yeah, it could go on and on. But
Yep.
Thomas, any points that I missed?
I think everything has been pretty much mentioned, right? Again, one thing, I think this list is spot on. Vulnerability management. What does that mean? To have a plan, not just scanning and identifying, but remediating. What does that look like, and how soon is that going to be done? I had multiple clients that they scanned, but they don't remediate. So what's the point? So it's really important to have a plan in action and verify and make sure the loopholes are closed.
Great point, Thomas.
Yeah.
All right, so you guys will get this deck. In this deck, we also put out the OWASP API top 10 as well, for you to take a look at, and then obviously the source to compare. As more, we talked about API in 2023, but coming back to it again in 2024, it's only going to continue to grow. So as you're thinking about your API usage, who you're integrating with, who you're sharing this with, maybe take a look at the OWASP API top 10 as well. It might help in a couple of areas. This will be on this list as well. So if there's any questions we can answer, let us know. Here's an email address for you. Be happy to answer anything. We've answered 5-6 questions that have come in to throughout this webinar, so we appreciate those great questions. If there's any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them. I told you how to get you done before lunch. You got 5 minutes back. We really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining. Thomas, Elgin, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Enjoy your day.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.